You can start now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in. This is now our third presentation with the Small Business Administration. We've got some really great resources. Jessica Maley and Bo Steiner, who are on the call from the US SBA, we've just been extremely fortunate to have their help through this process and walking through some of these programs. For those of you who participated in one of our first two Small Business Association programs, those were both tied to the first of three COVID bills we did. That first bill was an $8.3 billion program that included an additional $7 billion of enhanced lending capacity for the Small Business Association. That was rolled out. It was a significant increase in the lending authority that the SBA has. And as you might imagine, maybe this isn't obvious to you, we of course passed these rules in the legislative branch. The executive branch then has to implement the programs, and so there's a little bit of a lag between when that comes in. But that program is now fully operational, fully functional, and again, Jessica and Bo have walked through getting that scaled up here in Illinois and getting it implemented. In the third COVID bill, that's what's called the CARES Act. That was the very large $2.2 trillion act. That bill had a further expansion of the small business, a significant. Remember, the first one was $7 billion. This third one included a further expansion of small business authority by an additional $349 billion with a B dollars. So significantly expanding that authority, and that was really very intentional on the part of Congress because we felt that the things that the Federal Reserve can do that they did in 2008 to help the economy, buying corporate debt, getting involved in bailouts of public companies, those things tend to be targeted to companies that are big, have existing lending relationships, have access to public markets, and in many cases may have a short-term liquidity crisis, but the company itself can survive. Small businesses, of course, as you all know, are really a different matter. They often don't have those existing relationships. They don't have access to public markets, and pardon me. You can't necessarily ride through the liquidity crisis in the way you can in some of these large organizations. And so as a result of that, we very intentionally structured the program to try to target those smaller companies, and we expanded the eligibility in the program. So small business is defined as any organization with 500 employees or less at a given facility. We also expanded to provide eligibility to nonprofits, specifically to 501c3s and to 501c19s, which are veteran-owned organizations. And again, recognizing that those facilities are providing a critical resource. They employ a lot of folks in the district. Those employees, regardless of the fact that they happen to be employed by a nonprofit, are still an equally vital part of our economy, and their paychecks are at risk. So put that together with that definitional expansion. And then lastly, and maybe most notably, in that larger CARES Act bill, included this concept of loan forgiveness. The loans are not guaranteed to be forgiven, but in certain conditions, if you qualify, you can have that portion of the loan forgiven, which was used to cover your payroll expense, used to cover mortgage, rent, utilities. Basically, the idea is that we want to set up this program that says, this is not designed to be a program to, be a transfer of wealth from taxpayers to shareholders, but to the extent we can make sure that these programs are being used to keep businesses afloat, keep them operational, keep people getting paid, get us through this COVID crisis, and that's done. If for some reason then circumstances change and you can't pay the loan off, there's a provision for forgiveness for those things that were done in that capacity. So that's been done. That is now implemented. It is now being rolled out. I was just on a phone call with Secretary Mnuchin literally an hour ago. He said that they have so far deployed $98 billion of that 349. So it's this is full on in implementation mode. And they just released an additional FAQ today to deal with some of the issues in it. Now, I do want to say, Ellen, I want to acknowledge there is we've had this tension within the way that we have been trying to structure this sort of essentially disaster relief package for the economy. I don't want to use the word stimulus because it's really a disaster relief bill. But we've tried to structure this in a way that gets the money to where it needs to go in the economy, and at the same time make sure that the money gets there as quickly as possible. And there's a little bit of a tension in there, because to the extent we are simply ramping up existing programs, the money moves very quickly. To the extent the needs are not served by existing programs, there's a little bit of a lag. Now, since, as I said, we've expanded these programs to say we want to get to nonprofits, we want to include some forgiveness, there's some programmatic tweaks, and it has created some inefficiencies which are being worked through. This is not a partisan statement. It's just the challenge of creating such a massive program so quickly. And what we've heard from a number of the banks that are acting as intermediaries for this program is that because the paperwork is coming out so quickly, as you might imagine in your own operation, sometimes there's some conflict between document over here and a document over there, except that now you've got the banks who are having to make attestations to the accuracy of the documents. And there's been some glitches as the banks roll this out of saying, well, form 12 doesn't agree with form 47, and do I attest to this? And that has slowed some of the release of these funds. It's also created a situation where the banks have had a little bit of an unintended bias to kind of run downhill and favor their existing customers because they know that there's an existing relationship and there's a certain amount of trust there. That's not by design. It's a hiccup in the fact that the program has now been up for 4 days, really, and being rolled out. The guidance that the Treasury just released today is intended to address that. I will leave it to Jessica and Bo to outline whether they're seeing that or any comments on that. But do just be aware that we're moving up a very large program very quickly and is getting rolled out in a fairly efficient way, but none of us are perfect. But that is now there with the idea that what's here is likely going to be chewed through very quickly. There is a move afoot to provide an expansion. I think you've probably seen some of the coverage of this in the news. There's talk of another $250 billion-ish of expansion in capacity. That may or may not include some other entities as well. We've been very concerned about the healthcare sector. None of that is germane to this call because as I turn over to Jessica and Bo to walk through the program, they'll be walking through the program as implemented, not a program that we haven't passed legislatively yet. But do be aware that just as the last time we had one of these calls, we said, there's this big CARES Act coming. Once that's implemented, we'll do a call with Jessica and Bo to walk through it. We're doing that one now. This will continue to evolve as we pass more legislation, but be aware that those other changes are coming. So with that in mind, to give a little bit of overview, I hope I've set the table well. And I know Bo was running a little bit late. I don't know if he's able to join us yet, but I will turn over into either Bo or Jessica's good hands to walk through the mechanics of how to make sure that you can apply for these programs, where the eligibility is, and start to get some of your questions. Jessica or Bo, I believe the floor is yours.
Yeah, I believe we're still waiting on Bo. He's finishing up, so I'm going to start. Thank you, Representative Casten. That was super helpful overview. I'm going to go ahead and do my screen share. Did the slide just change? Does that? Okay, great. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining the call. I'm going to walk through the Paycheck Protection Program at a high level. On our last call, we did talk about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, but this is that next step that was included with the CARES Act, like the Congressman was saying. Yeah, so nonprofits are eligible, small businesses are eligible, sort of the same. The eligibility requirements have really been aligned, so they kind of match between the EIDL program through the SBA and the Paycheck Protection Program, which we'll explain goes to banks. But yeah, the max loan amount on this program is $10 million. It was $2 million on the EIDL program, so this is an increase. But it's not, everyone doesn't qualify for up to 10 million. It's based on your prior payroll. So it's basically 2.5 months of your payroll plus an extra 25%, because there are other costs besides payroll that are eligible for forgiveness through the loan. For each individual, it is limited to $100,000. So if you have people who are paid more than that, it's capped at $100,000 per person. The loan payments would be deferred for 6 months, but then there's some, you might never have to pay the loan at all because it is 100% forgivable if at least 75% of the proceeds are used for payroll. The other 25% can go to rent, mortgage, utilities. That's spelled out on the website as well. But the idea is that you would begin paying immediately for 8 weeks. You would pay your staff and you wouldn't lay anyone off. If you have laid people off, there is an opportunity to immediately rehire those people and still be qualified for forgiveness. Yeah, and then as we said here, the forgiveness will be reduced if full-time headcount declines or if salaries and wages decrease. So that is sort of the incentive to keep people on payroll and keep their salaries stable, is to qualify for that forgiveness. So yeah, here's some of the eligibility standards. Any small business with fewer than 500 employees, Congressman Casten is going over this, these private nonprofits or 501c19, the veterans organizations. Basically, we say private nonprofits, but that just means non-government entities. This isn't used to fund government bodies, but private nonprofits are eligible. Yeah, I'm going to skip those last two because I know you guys are the nonprofit audience, but there's a bit more information. If you are interested in SBA's size standards for small businesses, that's available on our website.
Hey, Jessica, if I could interrupt for 1 second. I see a question just came up here, which I should have addressed before, about whether or not these slides will be available. We will do as we did before and make all these slides in this presentation available on the congressional website, casten.house.gov. So if folks want to see this afterwards or the presentation, everything will be online at the end. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, so the loan has a maturity of 2 years, an interest rate of 1%. That's the final policy as it is now. And then the way you get this, so again, this is different than the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, in which you apply directly from the SBA and the funds came from the Treasury. This you will go through a designated approved SBA lender. There is a website now. You can click to it through the sba.gov/coronavirus, our main hub for information, and I'll include the specific link in the follow-up that you'll receive from the Congressman's office. But we do have a lender search tool at this point, so you can put in your zip code, you can search by area, and you can find an SBA approved lender for the PPP program. If you don't know where to start with a lender, or you haven't had an SBA loan in the past. And then yeah, the program is active, like the Congressman was saying. It started last Friday, and then it's going through June 30th, 2020. So here is some of the information that you'll need to submit. And again, lenders may ask for this in different forms. I know some banks have kind of translated this into online forms that can be filled out. So again, you'll want to talk to the lender that you're getting the loan through to find out what exactly you need to submit and in what format. But there is an SBA form. Then you'll need your payroll from the previous year. Like I said, it's your average monthly payroll times 2.5. And then be linked to what we're calling the interim final rule. It's basically all of the guidelines about how the program exists now in its creation. That's a public document on our website as well. And you can really get in the weeds there, and a lot of specific questions are answered around eligibility and how the loan is delivered. So that's a good place to start, also through sba.gov/coronavirus for that information. But yeah, just something to note is that this really isn't based on a credit check, sort of like it was with the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This is all based around what was your payroll, because again, the point is to keep your people paid during this challenging time. So here are the things that the PPP proceeds can be used for. The payroll costs, again, that's not just salary and wages, but healthcare benefits would qualify as well. sick leave, family leave, things like that. You can also use the PPP wages or PPP proceeds for that. Your mortgage payments, your rent payments, utility, interest payments on any other debts that were incurred before February 15th. So the idea is not that you are using this to pay. If you have existing debts that you have to keep up your payments on, that's what this is for. And then refinancing an economic injury disaster loan that has been in response to this crisis. If you have an idle loan that's out, you can use the PPP funds to refinance it. Talk briefly about some other trainings that other assistance that SBA is offering. And I know we mentioned this on our last calls, but I just want to emphasize we have a wide network of resource partners, small business development centers, women's business development centers, veterans business outreach centers, and all of them are available to help as well. You can go to sba.gov/local assistance, put in your zip code, and you can find a resource partner. And that's a great way, again, if your questions kind of go not just with this program, but beyond, sort of making strategies for recovery in the coming weeks, months, years, those partners can be extremely helpful. And then it does say that we're hosting 2 training sessions daily. The training sessions are kind of in flux right now just because we're receiving some new messaging. We want to make sure we're giving the most up-to-date information. So you can always visit sba.gov/IL, which is our district webpage for the most up-to-date information. And then sba.gov, probably on this last slide, yes, sba.gov/coronavirus. sba.gov/disaster. Those are our 2 main hubs of information. Again, the situation, we're learning more every day. The situation is improving every day. We certainly know that there have been challenges this first week. More lenders are being approved every day and able to make the loans. So it is growing and improving. But we're just doing our best, and we know that, we hear you guys. We know there are challenges right now in accessing it, but we put a lot of work into training up the lenders and getting them the information they need in order to make the loans. So yeah, I wanted to share that. Let me pause for a moment and see if Bo has joined us on the call. Might still be running a bit late. I'm gonna pause my screen too. Yeah, so let's, we can certainly go to some of the questions, and I'll try and answer the best I can. And again, I think I hope the screen share is paused, but illinois.do@sba.gov, that's our district office email inbox. And you can always share, send your questions there, and then we're routing those to the right people. So that's kind of the best way. If you are not getting a response or it's hard for you to get a hold of someone on the phone, we're recommending you go to illinois.do@sba.gov, because then we have a written record and we can kind of pass that along to the right people.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I think we're now open for folks. As we started this, I think I heard we had 300 or 400 folks and organizations who were signed up. So I'm afraid I don't know what the protocol is for answering questions, but I'm sure who's ever running back office here behind has circulated that out. So if you have questions, send them through. If you don't know how to ask questions, maybe somebody who is listening and on mute can point that out for us so that people can get them in.
Yeah, I think we had some people from your team who were going to hop in and help read the questions if Bo hadn't joined yet. So give us a second to catch up there.
Okay.
Laura?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
I have a question. We have a few people asking about 501c6 organizations, chambers of commerce, et cetera, if they are eligible and if anything is being done to assist them.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, our guidance is that 501c6s are not eligible, but Congressman, if you have any feedback, if there's plans to change that in future iterations of this.
Yeah, so for the time being, it's only the 501c3s and the C19s. Obviously, as I'm sure you can appreciate, there gets to be some trickier conflicts to manage once you have groups that are allowed to engage in political activity and conflicts of interest that we had to manage. I don't know as I sit here whether there's going to be any effort to expand those out. So I don't want to set any expectations, but but to the extent we learn more, I'll certainly let you know.
Okay, we have another question from Julie, who's asking, can life insurance benefits and employer match of retirement dollars like an IRA or 403B also be counted as payroll?
I have to check on the final rule. I do think that that is clarified, but I'm not sure off the top of my head if those would be eligible expenses. But that I think that is delineated in the final rule, so I'll be able to follow up with an answer on that.
Yeah, I believe that the expectation is that payroll includes all the benefits, so that if you have employer matches. I believe that's the intent, but I don't want to speak out of turn, so we'll make sure to get the specific answer from the text.
Bo might be able to speak to that too when he joins. He'll be hopping on soon.
Jessica, can you give us some guidance regarding employees versus consultants versus 1099 workers and how that this would apply to each of those groups?
Yeah, it's tricky, and it's definitely not the same for everyone. So the way I understand it is that there, and Congressman, please correct me if you have a different understanding of 1099 employees. There are circumstances under which a person who is self-employed as a 1099 would be eligible for their own to apply for this program on their own, and so then it wouldn't make sense for a company to also get the 1099 for their wages. So I think there are circumstances under which you could consider a 1099 wages that you would apply for under the PPP, but not in 100% of circumstances. So again, that would be something I feel like you would need to walk through with the lender while you were in the loan application process.
Yeah, I think in general, you want to walk through the lenders on putting all these together. The place where we spent a lot of time thinking about that issue was on the unemployment insurance side. So the unemployment insurance provisions, and obviously the purpose of this program is to try to prevent people from going on to needing unemployment insurance. But if that comes on the backside, then the unemployment provisions have been significantly expanded to also cover 1099, to cover gig economy types, to provide more coverage for folks on tipped wages. But within this one, and I see we do have Bo now, so why don't we give Bo again? Welcome, Bo. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
We're gonna give you we're gonna throw the two stumpers to you and see if we can impress the audience with your consistent expertise. Laura, you want to just give Bo the two questions that we just had partial answers to and see if Bo knows the answer?
Sure. Hi, Bo. Julie was asking, can life insurance benefits and employer match of retirement dollars like an IRA or 403B also be counted as monthly payroll?
Sure. So from the standpoint of calculation of the payroll expenses, when I read the interim final rule, it does include retirement contributions and other insurance contributions. So it does seem to be built into the calculation.
I'm glad my memory was right on that one, Bo. And the second question, Bo, was on 1099 employees. Do you know how that factors into the payroll calculation?
Sure. So for the purposes of the payroll calculation, both on the loan origination side, so what your payroll expenses were, and for the purposes of the 75% for forgiveness, the way the rule reads right now is that 1099s are not included in those calculations. And I think the genesis of that is that they can apply on their own for the PPP program. So, their costs don't go into the payroll costs for the business.
Okay, we have a couple of questions regarding nonprofits that have all volunteers. They don't have employees. Would they be eligible for the EIDL loan since they wouldn't necessarily qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program?
Yeah, generally speaking, so what the EIDL loan is for primarily is for working capital needs. So businesses and nonprofits in this case, and which most nonprofits are eligible to apply for the EIDL program, could use those funds for more operating costs and operating expenses that you incur on an ongoing basis. So yes, that would be appropriate.
Hey, Bo, can you clarify for the PPP, since it also covers utilities and interest and other elements, if you had volunteers, could you not take a loan into the PPP program that would cover those other operating costs?
I don't know the answer to that. The issue would be that the calculation for the loan is based on payroll expenses.
Okay.
So the actual use of proceeds, yes, if you never mind the forgiveness component, you can use those proceeds on rent, mortgage interest, utilities, those sorts of expenses. But as it relates to the forgiveness factor, you need to remember that at least 75% needs to go towards payroll and payroll expenses.
Okay.
Tina wants to know, since nonprofits don't file taxes, how do they take advantage of tax credits for the 80 hours of sick leave and 10 weeks of extended family leave?
So for me, I'm not equipped to answer that question. That's a Department of Labor area that I would have to reach out, and maybe I can get more information on that.
Well, I think I might be able to answer that one. I assume that what you're referring to is the provisions in the, and I think this actually wasn't in the CARES Act. This was in the Families First Act, the $100 billion that provided reimbursement for companies for extending their, the 2 weeks that you have to take off for extended sick leave because you're self-quarantining, 2 weeks beyond that for short-term disability if you become infected. And what that rule said was that if you are over 500 employees, then that's provided to you in the form of a tax rebate. If you are under 500 employees, you can, at your option, choose to take that as a direct cash payment. So, so for the folks and the idea was really that for the, for the bigger companies, you're more likely to have a tax appetite and more likely to have the liquidity to ride out waiting until the taxes are due. But under that program, the distributions that are available to companies below 500 people, which obviously you qualify. I assume if you're on this call, you'd qualify under that gap, is available as a direct cash payment. But that would not be through the SBA loan. If you've got specific questions, follow up with our office afterwards, and we can put you in touch with the appropriate folks at the Department of Labor on that.
Okay, a specific question about the application. The application asks for the owner, and the nonprofit doesn't have an owner. Would that be the board of directors? They're asking how to fill out that portion of the application.
So I don't know the answer to that question directly. I've been asked it. We're trying to get that answer specifically. Or for questions like that, I do recommend that you call the customer service line for the program. That's at 800-659-2955, and they should be able to walk you through how to fill out certain fields in the application for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan program.
Okay, Matthew's asking, can an organization that is a 501c3 and a government organization formed by an IGA be eligible for this loan?
Can you say that again?
Sure. Can an organization that is a 501c3 and a government organization formed by an IGA be eligible for this loan?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm happy to try and find out the answer.
Okay, thanks. David is asking if you could elaborate on the basis for forgiveness of this loan.
Sure. So the way the whole process runs is once you're approved for the loan, basically the loan takes your documents, they send it to SBA for approval, or they basically approve it, right? And then they send it to SBA for approval. SBA says, okay, sends a loan authorization back to the lender, then you go through closing. At that point, then you'll receive at least an initial disbursement with future disbursements of the remainder at some time later as appropriate. What the timelines that are laid out in the interim final rule are that 7 weeks later is kind of the timeline when the bank can start looking to to put in for forgiveness for that loan. So what happens is they will get with you as the business owner, ask for certain documentation to document your payroll expenses, and then send that information up to SBA for review. Once approved, then the Treasury actually pays off that loan that you have with the bank on your behalf, or whatever lender you're working with on your behalf. What they're going to look at is two things. One is they want to look at your payroll. So at least 75% of the amount that you were loaned needs to go towards payroll and payroll expenses. Yeah, there's other things you can use the proceeds for, but that 75% is kind of the key number. That's the first thing. The second thing that they're going to look at is headcount. So looking at your average headcount prior 12 months, which is kind of the basis for the analysis, and then looking at your headcount in the subsequent period of time after you've received the loan to make sure that it's consistent with what the before and after. I don't have the specific calculations that they'll be looking at. If, for example, you have 10, your kind of basis is 10 staff members, and then you go down to 8, what that looks like from a forgiveness perspective or a reduction in the amount that's forgiven. We're still waiting on additional guidance on that part of it. But that's kind of how the whole thing works, and how eventually the bank is going to look at analyzing the amount of forgiveness that they're going to apply for your particular loan. If a portion is not forgiven, then that just is that's going to just become a loan for the remainder of that 2 years at a 1% interest rate.
You know, I think I'd reiterate, I think Jessica made the point very well at the start that a traditional loan is based on a credit analysis, and this is based on a payroll analysis. So you shouldn't apply for this loan because you expect it to be forgiven. But on the other hand, the structuring of the loan, of how it's put together, is going to be something that's structured not based on whether you're likely to default, but trying to make sure that you are that you've got a basis of employees who depend on you to be an ongoing viable enterprise, and try to make sure that you have the cash flow necessary to keep those employees around, so that when we get through this public health crisis, the economy, as much as we are possible, is able to get going again.
Okay, thank you. I want to remind everyone attending that if they have questions, to put them in the question box so I can feed them to the Congressman and to Bo. There was a question about that piggybacks on what you just said, Congressman. For a non-for-profit organization, is the prior year the prior calendar year, or is it the prior fiscal year?
I believe it's calendar year. Do you know, Bo?
So actually, Treasury put out a FAQ recently, and I will share that with your team, Congressman, so they can push it out. But it basically gave a bunch of different use cases depending on the business, and that would help you and your individual circumstance figure out which would be an appropriate period to go off of. Generally speaking, what it says is, you know, it's 12-month look back. I think it gives a lot of latitude whether that's 12 months from now, 12 months being 2019 tax returns. So I would recommend that you take a look at that and see what fits with what your organization is looking at.
I would assume, and this is just bringing you up to speed, Bo, I had said at the start that I was literally just off a call with Mnuchin an hour before this started. And at the end of that call, he said, we will be releasing an FAQ with a number of the issues within the next hour. I saw that pop up in my inbox, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So all of these things are very much in flux right now.
Yeah, we're definitely moving fast on all this stuff and trying to get the money out as quickly as we can. I know.
Okay, what if you don't need all 2.5 times your monthly payroll? Can you ask for less, or can you just give or pay back the unused portion, and would that jeopardize forgiveness of the loan?
So I don't know that that's specifically addressed, but I think that would be something that you would want to work out with your lender as you're going through the loan making process. I would expect that, you know, if you don't feel like you need it all, that would be okay, and you just work through that with your lender of record.
Okay, we have a question that's not about PPP, but is about PPE. How can essential workers receive PPE? Those are who are providing food and other essential businesses.
So this is top of mind for everybody. The call that I just mentioned, I was on with Mnuchin, was also with the vice president, with Dr. Fauci, with Admiral P. We all call him because none of us can pronounce his last name, but the folks who are overseeing these programs. Look, what everybody agrees to, you know, outside some of the more high profile political events we're seeing right now, is that we do not have as much PPE as we need. And that is creating some resource allocation problems. As Admiral P put it on the call, he said, we have regional issues where S does not equal D, which was a very nerdy way of saying there is more demand than there is supply. What's being done to try to ration that, to be as prudent about that as we can, is that within FEMA and then within the state level agencies, and the state level agencies really structurally end up largely overseeing FEMA, although you know we're all working through this to some degree, is that they are making decisions about how to best allocate that protective equipment based on where they see hotspots coming in, where they see hotspots coming off. And so as we get to a point, you know, as we seem to be right now, where you know, Washington State seems to kind of be bending the curve and through the worst of it, that there's a central controlling agency that can look and say, okay, now let's maybe deprioritize this as an area for PPE and move it to a place like New Orleans that seems to really be exploding right now, or you know, some other sort of sector rather than geographic constraint. What we were told on this call is that that Admiral P now has granularity into not just where the PPE is, but to the full supply chain of the manufacturers, and so that the federal government can, down to the county level, know where the supply chains are and can remobilize appropriately. Now, all of that is how the system is supposed to work. How it is actually working, I think we all, you know, you don't have to watch too many of Governor Pritzker's press conferences to know that there is some concern about state and federal coordination to make sure that that's all done appropriately. What I would recommend you do is put your first call on PPE into the governor's office. We can get resources to you as to who are the appropriate people, but the governor's office is really doing a heroic job right now of trying to manage where's the supply in the district. Let's make sure that we understand where the needs are in the state. Let's make sure we understand where the resources are in the state, because maybe we have a manufacturer that can quickly tool up but needs some help doing it. And to the extent they then know the best way to coordinate that through federal facilities, do it that way. But it is a challenge, because even if everybody's doing this perfectly, we still have the issue that the national stockpile of PPE that you hear sometimes is less than 1% of the total volume of PPE that the Department of Health and Human Services said we could potentially need if we don't turn the corner really quickly. Now that's not to say we have 1% of what we need right now, but it is to say that the healthcare institutions, the other folks who have some of that, are trying to be a little bit cautious about making sure that they're as prudent as they can with their resources right now. So be patient, recognize that there's good people trying to make the best of a difficult situation. But it is not what any of us would have liked it to be at this moment.
Okay, Nat is asking, if a 501c3 has several different locations but is all part of one organization, is the employee count by location or based on the overall organization number?
So for the purpose of, so just for clarity's sake, for nonprofits, there is no size standard, so to speak, for nonprofits. So basically, almost all nonprofits are eligible to participate. From the standpoint of for the purposes of calculation of the payroll and payroll expense, that would be under that single umbrella of all the locations that would be appropriate for that particular entity. So it's kind of for nonprofits at the entity level.
But at the entity, not the physical location level. So it's how you're legally structured, right? But not how where your employees are physically located.
Okay, Jennifer is asking if these loans require collateral or guarantees. Does that apply to nonprofits?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I will say for the PPP, there is no collateral, there is no personal guarantees. For the EIDL, it would be from a collateral perspective, they would look to look for collateral on loans over $500,000, but that would be the organizational, any collateral that the organization has. But there's no, basically the personal guarantee, there is no owner of a nonprofit. So the personal guarantee wouldn't be applicable.
But just to clarify, Bill, I don't think the EIDL is applicable to nonprofits, right? The PPP has the nonprofit eligibility. Is the EIDL eligible for nonprofits as well?
It is. Okay. It is. Yep.
You just took my next question. What for a nonprofit that is small and has under 25 employees, where they haven't laid anybody off yet, but they have reduced staff hours, with some staff currently on furlough, would you advise those staff members to file for unemployment, or how would that tie in with the PPP program?
Sure. So can't really advise anybody on what they should or shouldn't do. I think it's going to be dependent upon their circumstance. However, the intent of the PPP is really to be able to bring people back on staff and or bring people back up to their normal hours through the use of those loan proceeds. So that's the purpose of the loan. Now, obviously, if you bring people back on staff, then they're likely not eligible to remain on unemployment because they are now employed. So I'd say that's kind of the calculus that the employee is going to have to do. Do I go back or do I remain on unemployment? But from the employer standpoint, this is a tool that you have, or from a nonprofit standpoint, it's a tool that you have to bring those employees back on or to bring them back up to their normal full-time hours.
Yeah, and I would just add, to reiterate what you said about we shouldn't be giving advice. Speaking as someone who spent a lot of time as an employer, I can't ever imagine a situation where I would have thought that I was smart enough to know that it was in my employees' interest for me to let them go. You have to make your business decisions from a business perspective. These programs that we're talking about today are designed first and foremost to try to ensure as much as we can that your cash flow situations don't force you into making reducing your head count for reasons that we can in some way mitigate through federal programs. As a completely separate matter, we've spent a fair amount of intellectual capacity and financial resources to bolster the unemployment insurance program to try to make sure that we provide protections, especially and in some ways substantially, because the historic structure of the unemployment program was designed before we had a lot of gig economy and 1099. There's just a lot of people who are going to slip through the cracks, and so we wanted to expand that. We've done those protections in both pieces, but speaking not as your congressman, but as a someone who employed a lot of people, once upon a time, make the decision about what's best for your business. Do that, according to your strongest moral and ethical compasses. But I generally would not advise anybody to say that we know what's best for the people who work for us. They'll make those decisions on their own.
Okay, I have quite a few questions in the question box regarding the timeline, when EIDL loans and PPP loans will actually start being dispersed and get in the hands of the nonprofits and small business owners.
Sure. So I'd love to have a perfect timeline for you right now. I do not. On the economic injury disaster loan program, my understanding is that disbursements are starting to happen. We expect that to accelerate due to technology that we're using to process the applications. That's both the EIDL and the EIDL Advance. But I can't give you a specific timeline that I can point to say, okay, you will receive something by this date. So that's EIDL. On the PPP, the lenders are working very hard to manage the inflow of applications that they're experiencing right now. In addition, SBA is trying to manage all of the requests that we're getting. So from the standpoint of turnaround time between when you submit your full application to the lender, or here's kind of the windows that you're going to have to look at. Full application into the lender, they have to submit to SBA. We have to turn that around and give them an authorization, and then they go to closing. So I expect that the first couple steps in that process to go relatively quickly, but again, it's going to depend on the manpower or the staffing levels of your lender and what capacity they have to push those through. On the back end, I know that we're looking at the lenders to disperse, at least on an initial basis, very quickly. You get funds out to the community. What does very quickly mean right now? I can't say that 100%, but notionally, I think we're trying to get to, everybody's trying to get to like a 5 business day initial disbursement, and then, you know, the remainder being negotiated between the borrower and the bank. But I wish I had more discrete answers for you, but I don't at this time.
One of the things for those of you, because I know you've got to think about how to plan for this for your cash flows, I would strongly encourage you to put that question to your, you know, whoever your existing bank is, because they're the ones who are going to be doing, you know, whatever bank you're using to process this. Maybe it's your existing bank, maybe it's not. Recall what I'd said in the introduction, that we passed the CARES Act about a week and a half ago. The relative executive branch agencies that had to implement the things that are a part of the PPP got the program up and running 4 days ago, which is pretty quick. That's pretty good, right, for this massive thing to get it through. We're now working through, and the banks are in a position where they're going through and saying, okay, we have a new program, we have some expansions of eligibility, we've got to create the paperwork. We have to make sure that our paperwork is coordinated with the SBA, coordinated with, you know, Department of Treasury, whatever other constraints that they have. And what I am in general hearing, you know, off the record from the banks, is that the banks that had a strong existing presence within the SBA market are finding it easier to scale up because they're just more familiarity with it. And to the extent they're working with an existing customer where they know the details, they've all got, you know, the relevant financial records easy, you know, they've got personal relationships, those are moving a little bit quicker than the ones where they're saying, we now need to expand this. Now, unfortunately for this call, since the SBA historically has not applied to nonprofits, that means that it's probably going to be a little bit slower just for administrative reasons. But again, what I would say is talk to your bank, say we need to plan for this, we understand that there's these scale up issues going on. Can you give me some sense of what's a reasonable time period to expect so I can manage my liquidity? Because they'll have a better view of what their own internal process looks like than Bo or I do from our angle. And if you've got the time, you might shop a couple banks, because some banks are going to be more savvy and quicker to run on this than others are.
Sorry, we have a visitor.
Thought I lost you for a second. So Anne Marie has a question about the application having changed from, there was an older application, now there's a newer one, and if you could, I believe this is for the EIDL loan, if you could walk through how they would submit the new application for that loan.
So if you were able to submit under the first iteration of the of the loan application where you went into an electronic loan application, you uploaded certain documents to support that application. If you were able to complete that process, you should be fine. You shouldn't have to reapply. If you went through, we had an interim solution where you downloaded the PDF documents, you filled them all out, and then you uploaded them through a box.com secure upload. If you use that solution, we are asking you to go back in and do the application. Your place in line is held, but this will streamline the process for any decision and disbursement. And then if you've gone in since March 30th, which was a week ago Monday, if you went through that process, then you were able to apply for both the EIDL and the EIDL Advance. You shouldn't have to do anything else. So those were kind of the 3 use cases there. I would say that if you were looking to apply for the EIDL Advance and you went through that first online loan application, you would need to go back in again and apply for the EIDL Advance through the current streamlined process. It's a very fast process though. It shouldn't take you much time to do that.
Okay, for Congressman Casten, do you expect the next phase of legislation will have the same terms as PPP, or might eligibility and benefits be expanded?
I would be careful to make any predictions about what the next phase of legislation is going to be. It's an awfully dynamic time right now as we try to figure out how to legislate from afar. What in general, you know, and again, I don't want you to bank on this, but because most of what we're able to do when we're not present in Congress are things that we can do unanimously, I would be very surprised if we made a lot of programmatic changes on the next program. It will probably more be an expansion, certainly an expansion in funds, possibly an expansion in the eligibility. There, as I'd mentioned in my opening remarks, there were some concerns in the first round that some of the nonprofit healthcare facilities, for example, might not qualify under some of these rules, and we want to make sure that you know those people have access to resources. How that works, how we go through the negotiation, both between Democrats and Republicans, between the House and the Senate, I would be very reluctant to predict at this point. But I do expect we'll probably have visibility on something. Late this week, early next week, and get a sense of where that's going. I also should mention that there's already fairly active discussion about a much larger CARES 2 bill, and this is not what we're talking about in the near term. Is not CARES 2. There's talk about potentially doing infrastructure funding, some other issues in there, but this one that we're talking about in the short term would purely be an expansion of the PPP program, recognizing how quickly the funding is going out right now. So, like I said, on the one hand, I wouldn't want you to handicap based on my guess, but that's about the best way that I would handicap how it's going to play out over the next 3 to 7 days.
Thank you, and thank you both so much for your time. I want to just give you both an opportunity for your final remarks. We're getting near the end of our webinar time.
Go ahead, Bo.
All right. Well, hey, Congressman, again, thank you for having me today. I appreciate working with all your staff on these two. I know this is top of mind for everyone, and just appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak to the many people that are participating today. The more that we can get this information out and help, our friends and our families across in our communities is super important. And so I guess just thank you for the chance to be here and share some information.
Well, Bo and Jessica, it's not lost on me that we come up with these ideas, we pass these laws. Hello, Kat, and then we create a ton of work for folks like you to go get it done. So I know you guys are working really long hours right now, and appreciate you being available. To everybody else, I would just say, thank you all for your sacrifice in this moment. As I keep trying to remind people, and please remind people in those networks you have, we are in this inextricable linkage right now between a public health crisis and an economic crisis. The one is the cause of the other is the cause of the one. The chicken and the egg are totally combined at this point. If we move too quickly to open up the economy again, we are going to have a massive, much larger public health problem. On the other hand, as long as the economy is shut down, folks don't have access to resources, we create food insecurity. There are inequities in the way that goes through that, which I know so many of you nonprofits have as your mission to try to address. And those issues are exaggerated the longer we're here. And so we have to get this done together. We have to get this done by making sure that we look out for all of our fellow human beings, no matter what, what gender they are, what color they are, what political party they are. We are all in this together. And I thank you all for what you do in your own public works and what we all do individually to try to get to this moment together. So thank you. We'll keep pushing on it. Again, this presentation, this video, we will have it all up along with the slides at the start on our website shortly, casten.house.gov. So you can find it, you can share it. You'll have our contact information. So if you have follow-up questions, things you didn't like our answer, we have an impartial answer, questions you have time to answer, shoot them off to us and we'll get you a response back as quick as we can. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.